when we think about the government and what the government is trying to control and master and deliver, it seems utterly nonsensical from a practical point of view that it's going to be able to continue to do that in a successful way and that delivers for citizens.
Looking for Growth, or LFG, is a political movement aimed at putting pressure on the government in order to end the decades of decline that we've been experiencing in the UK. We are fed up with low economic growth, stagnant wages, continuous decline in our high streets, to our opportunities. We are the first generation which are going to have the children are going to be worse off than their previous generation. We think this is unacceptable. We're building a movement of people who agree with us that this needs to change, who want to get involved, put pressure on the government through various means, whether that's writing new policies, writing new ideas, putting campaigns out locally to say, no, it's time that we get building, it's time that we support our infrastructure, support our local businesses and drive growth in the UK. That's what LFG is, and that's what we're aiming to achieve. And this podcast is one of the ways we want to do that.
We want to talk to people that care about the UK, whether you're a business or an industry leader, building a startup or delivering a locally growth-focused kind of service or community. The goals of the podcast are kind of to have an honest conversation about the challenges the UK faces, kind of highlight tangible ways, whether policies, products, or processes that could deliver growth and improve the UK, and to bring discussion around new growth, why it matters and how we can deliver it to audiences across the UK. We're going to cover topics such as what growth means and why it's important, what are the low-hanging fruits, what are the industry's opportunities that the UK should be looking at that we currently aren't, how our cultural attitudes towards change affects policies, are we holding on to the past too much, and how to change legacy institutions, and kind of out there and bizarre, crazy ideas by today's standards of what change could look like. We kind of want to shift the consensus a bit.
And for our first episode, we're very proud and happy to have Harriet Green on the, well, you're not on the sofa, you're on the armchair, but in the room with us. So thank you so much, Harriet, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honour and privilege to be here on inaugural podcast, and very excited for the conversation. My name's Harriet Green. I'm the founding partner of Basis Capital, and we exist to invest in founders who are building where the state is failing. That means that we have a pretty broad remit. We look at everything from healthcare and education to housing to energy to bins to space, anything that either is currently run by government or is something that has somehow been touched by government, so perhaps centrally planned or regulated the hell out of. And we think that actually freeing up those sectors and areas of our economy rather than continuing to overplan them and centralise is a better route to go down. And our lens on that is to find people who are reinventing our public services and thinking about what these sectors could look like if reinvented and revived.
Like, key question from someone such as myself who was in government, it's so exciting to hear of like an outside body who's trying to take not a fight but like a competition to government. And I guess what I'm really interested in understanding is like your journey to that. Why did you start Basis Capital? What was kind of the desire and drive?
Yeah, so how did I come to be here in life? I can't remember a time where I didn't think that government was rubbish, and I was fortunate enough to be sort of brought up in a thinking household where the refrain was that there could be and there was always an option to improve things, and you could be quite heretical in how far you push that in your own mind. And I consider Basis to be my life work. I come to it sort of going, this is going to be the thing I spend the next 40 years doing until they stuff me off in my grave. And I think we probably need that length of time in terms of run-up actually to consider how we augment, change, and completely rethink the fabric of our society. And it is that fundamentally we've had the best part of a century now where we've centrally planned and we've responded to the horrors that were 2 world wars of the last century with a Keynesian paradigm that has led us to an environment where we are very, very low agency and we're also low growth. And I think we're going to need a generation at least to do something about that. There are some intractable and potentially sort of near impossible elements to how we think about things at basis. If you're looking to reinvent public services, one, you're looking at things where people have already paid, so they've already paid tax. So why is someone going to want to pay twice for bin collection? You've also got the free rider problem if you're dealing with a public service or specifically a public good. We kind of see it as our mission to work out how to think inventively around those things, and we do think that there are solutions and ways forward. But it's no mean feat and no mean task. But it is something that feels exactly where I would like to be and where I'm pleased to be.
Why do you think the government hasn't, and I guess the private sector as well, a bit of a two-part question, hasn't been able to deliver those services?
I mean, there's a sort of practical answer to that, and there's my answer to it. My answer is that sort of existentially, government can't deliver services that will continue to improve, because for things to improve, for standards to go up, you need competition. And if you have one provider of something, you have the antithesis of competition. You just have a track for stuff getting worse.
So is it kind of like a natural thing that, when you create institutions, they're automatically gonna ineluctably
become crap? Yes. That's,
so it's not a UK specific problem?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a Western specific thing, but that's just a function of the kind of time that we're in and the points at which Western governments are at. I think there's a more practical way of answering it as well, which is just that the world is too complex. Whether you kind of put a global filter on that, whether you just talk about the sheer number of people that would kind of come under the auspices of something that is being centrally planned and then meted out as a service for any government to do it effectively. And it's frankly an impossible job that our public servants have today trying to do some of this stuff. You can point to anything like sort of the dinner party problem, where you have people sitting around a dinner table and some people want to move and some people don't want to overhear a certain person, or they want to leave halfway through, or they only want to talk about certain things, and you've got so much complexity that you cannot plan who should sit next to whom at the start of that dinner for that dinner to pan out as you would like. And when we think about the government and what the government is trying to control and master and deliver, it seems utterly nonsensical from a practical point of view that it's going to be able to continue to do that in a successful way and that delivers for citizens.
And the private sector part?
I think the issue with the way that the public sector and private sector have kind of interacted to date is that you've kind of had the worst of both worlds. So, a good touch point here is where when people sort of think that they're looking at privatisation, trains, for example. Well, actually, what you're dealing with there is a scarce resource, which is the track. And if you had true privatisation, anyone could lay any track anywhere if they could get someone to sell them the land. So you've always got these pushes and pulls that actually warp the incentives on both sides. You don't have the full nationalisation of a service, nor do you have red in tooth and claw, a private delivery of something, which obviously comes with its own slings and arrows. So I think it's also very difficult, perhaps more personally, it's very difficult for the private sector to be incentivised somewhere where there's already a provider and buyer of first and last resort. Why would you go and set up a new bidding company when that's already provided? What is the incentive for someone to go and do that? And we don't have the kind of ecosystem around a lot of this stuff either. So if you are trying, for example, to set up a health tech and sell to the NHS, a lot of VCs won't touch you because they know that the buying cycles are so difficult, one, to get into, but two, to maintain a holdover in terms of managing to actually secure revenues as a new
entrant. It could be years
entrant.
as well that you're in the pipeline. Yeah.
So yes, I think it's very difficult for both sides of the equation to move forward successfully.
I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about it kind of being a Western problem with the legacy. And so why do you think particularly it's a Western problem? What do you think that other kind of places do?
Because I think that defines into existence a certain level of evolved governance. So I think that's a bit of a kind of disingenuous way of answering it, but it's not that it couldn't happen elsewhere. It's that when we're talking about the West, we're talking about a certain point in the evolution and progression of central power and centralised power.
It feels like a problem which is so intrinsic to how government operates and really kind of unexciting for a lot of people to solve. So I was, for example, I was speaking to someone in government a few days ago, and they were like, we really want to push things forward. We really want to get like tools into government, increase productivity in the public sector, and we've got a central team in government working on this right now, and they're frustrated with how slow it's being. But, they're trying to drive it from the centre, and it just feels like, why are you trying to solve everything from a centralised central government, very centre of government solution, rather than like actually big problem is just your procurement processes, like you just said with the NHS there. NHS should be a massive buyer. We put £170 billion a year or something through the NHS. That should be like a ripe market for new innovation to come in. But are you saying from your experience, it's one which a lot of VCs, etc., won't touch the barge pole because the procurement process is just horrific? Yeah,
so I think there's a couple of things to pull on there. One is that I genuinely think that anyone who goes into government does so because they want to enact change and they want to make a difference. And then they get into government and they find that they are hauling themselves through mud, and even the kind of most get up and go people find themselves stymied at every turn, and if you talk to friends, acquaintances, and people you come across, it's always the same sort of story and the same struggles. I think it's important to remember that actually, and I think LFG embodies that, so and manifests that so well, because you see people cross-party, non-partisan, coming together because they sort of recognise that they're trying to do something and they're kind of a little bit kicking against some sort of tide. So that's one thing. And then I think with procurement, it's and thinking about kind of whether there's a reflex for being able to fund businesses that are going to enter the procurement process. A more pertinent thing is to go back a step and go, well, is the procurement process one that would ever allow for any innovation fundamentally? I think the answer to that, unfortunately, is no. Like, again, it is inherently designed so that you have one provider of something. The scary thing for people is that the alternative to that is a true marketplace, and that means that you actually need to have institutions, organisations and companies that compete with government, not just to compete in the procurement process, but to compete with the entire wedge that is the provision of a service by government through its own procurement process or otherwise. So I think we have to go back a step and actually say, well, what would it mean to have something other than procurement in the first place? And it means that you have to have entirely new providers, not just new actors and new entrants coming in and trying to engage with that process, but actually entirely different models.
And that's a really interesting frame of it, right? You could imagine bins. Let's pick bins because that was one you brought up earlier, and also
I love bins.
Bins are always like, we used to have a family meal like every month where our grandparents, our uncle and auntie, etc. And bins was always one of the like top items after dinner where people would bring up. But you can imagine a scenario, right, where you would have different suppliers who say, well, we'll offer to collect your bins. This is a service we'll give you. We'll do twice weekly collections for this, whatever. We're only going to pick up this type, and then you kind of select which one you want to spend your council tax money towards.
Yeah.
In your area, and like that's the market, right?
Yes, and it's actually a surprising volume of public services do not have at their centre a public good. So air, defence, these are things that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Everyone can access them. You can't stop people accessing them, but you can have a situation where a lot of people are using them and only some people are paying for them, so the free rider problem. Bins could just commercialise it. Obviously you have a situation where you put your bins out and you click bins ready to be collected in your little bin app, and then Pete from next door comes out and plonks his bag next to yours, and that's irksome, and he is actually being a free rider, but he's free riding on something that is being paid for, and if you wanted to exclude him, you could do so. I think actually when you break it down, a lot of our public services, there's no reason why there shouldn't be a marketplace where people can have a greater degree of choice and actually say, well, I would like to use this service, and it would work in the same way that we understand any kind of market or commercial decision to work in other parts of our lives.
What's the transition like? What's the how do we get to this? Obviously, basis capital is your basis. You're part of trying to drive this, right? You're trying to find the cracks in the system where you can create that competition and drive it. Where do you feel there's the most optimism or the most opportunity for that currently?
I think you have to start with the things that you have to adopt the same kind of thought processes that you would kind of out in the real world, if you like, just in business. So you look for the things that are easy to chunk off because there is a problem and there are a bunch of people associated or tied to that problem who probably feel pretty neglected and like nobody's trying to help them with that problem, and you come up with a solution and you try and sell them that solution. We know what some of these things are. In the UK, it's things like fixing our roads. It's things like sorting out rubbish collection and pointing out to people, even though it's devastating, that actually recycling is completely bogus and we're all being turned into this greater enslaved mob washing out tuna cans, and only takes one bad actor for that all to end up in an incinerator. And hey, we need cheap energy, so that's that. Using public assets in a way that is more conducive to helping fund social care, which is obviously the big thing for local governments. Another great love of mine is public toilets, and I think not having, like potholes, not having decent public toilets is one of those very visible, tangible things that make people kind of feel a bit rubbish, and it just kind of eats away at you that there isn't this kind of civic fabric anymore. Those are the kinds of areas where there are plenty of people at a local level especially, but also central level, who are are desperately sort of trying to muddle through existing systems and processes, and just with the right degree of innovation and recentering of incentives, there are kind of ways forward that can be offered there. So we start with the least sexy everyday stuff when we think about kind of what can be chunked off first and where is there the most hope, because hope is just equal to success. Where are you most likely to have some success?
These, like, I've come around a lot to the idea of, as well, these small things having a cascading effect.
Yes.
Like I would, especially having been in central government, in Treasury, where you're like shifting around big amounts of money, you kind of get trapped on this idea of, no, if it's not like a big lever, it's not going to make a tangible difference. But actually, things like potholes, bin collections, public toilets, but just general state of disrepair of a high street or a local park, these things like have such a grating effect, I think, where people, it like creates this spiral where people feel less and less proud about their local area, less willing to invest in it, less willing to go out of their kind of way to support it and to grow it. And actually, if you start changing those small amendments, people feel like good about it. Traveling around the country, going to different chapters and seeing different parts of the country and going, wait a second, why do I feel very different in this area when I do going down to my seaside town where I grew up, which is, old Victorian seaside town, very lovely place, but, it's looking a bit tired. It's like, it's because they're just like basic things which they're getting right.
And I think, and this is going to sort of sound slightly daft, but that's wrong with it. Roads are kind of the case in point there. A road is you have to get on a road to get somewhere. So, if you're in your town centre, then every shop that you see is on a road. If you are in the suburbs, what abuts a road? It's people's homes. What's against the road? It's a pavement, and on the pavement you've got people's rubbish. Also, if people are littering, then that is, on a road. If you've got street furniture, and obviously I think we're all getting a gut full of interesting and slightly aggressive street furniture in this day and age. That signals something to people. If they've got giant, terrifying bits of Duplo being put outside, kind of civic spaces, that is, again, it is a road-related thing, and it tells them something about the place that they live. So you can take a very everyday thing, and you can tessellate it to all these things that, as you say, these kind of like points of contact for people's everyday lives. And I think the reason that's important, and as you describe it, that cascading effect is important, is that you can't control everything. So much better to just tweak something and let everything else fall into place in a way that the market determines, because that is the sum of people's desires, considerations, wants, creativities, etc.
Do you ever wonder, when basics capital is massive, all your companies doing very well, that there's gonna ever be any kind of like public backlash to like certain sectors of societies getting these services? And kind of how do you feel about that? And
probably.
Yeah.
I think on a daily basis about all the things that sort of could go wrong, kind of actually go wrong, and then kind of optically go wrong. Like how many ways could someone be lambasted for doing something? If you're going, well, why don't we build alternative public services? There are many, many ways. Doesn't make me less desirous of wanting to do it. And so many of those, it's kind of is pretty straightforward to start listing them out. But my other half always says to me, there's no point worrying about anything until it's actually happened. So until then, I'm holding on to my hat and seeing.
There must be like a public good desire within you, right? Because if you're basically doing, you're VC, right? But you're VC for GovTech or solutions in the public sector, as opposed to going out there and finding the next unicorn or startup. Like, what's the What drove you to that?
So to unpick some of that, we can't really call ourselves a VC because it's a private fund. So Basis is just my capital and which we're deploying to businesses. But actually that gives us a wonderful kind of blank sheet in many ways, because it means that we're not beholden to LPs who are sitting there and saying, well, you know, these are the side letters you've got and things you can and can't do. There are no stipulations to where we invest. That means that we can go, is this a superb team who are building something that we think should exist? That's it. And you know, you can say, well, you know, that seems like a sort of quasi-charitable endeavour. Maybe it is, but I think we are at a point now where we need a few of us doing that sort of thing. And, you know, and there are so many people out there who are kind of sticking their oar in and having a go at something. That's sort of one thing. And then the other thing is that quite a lot of the kinds of businesses that are being invested in by the venture capital community at the moment are kind of augmenting a little bit anyway. Obviously, most obviously in the face of AI, but that means that you're seeing kind of new models and new combinations of software, hardware, and those models as well being blended together, which means that typical litmus that the industry has historically looked at, which is the kind of proprietary nature of software, you know, how much of a moat is a company building around the software that they're creating, is kind of nuancing a little bit. And so there's a lot of openness to looking at different kinds of businesses, which is great for us. We're a really tiny fund, so being able to work with those who've been there, done that, and got the T-shirt and have got more capital available is a real honour. And kind of having some of those conversations on unpacking what businesses of the future are going to look like is really interesting. And it means that you've got more capital allocators looking at businesses that actually come within this precinct, come under the guise of it's kind of like a service that someone might use instead of using this traditional provider of public service. There's also sort of notion in VC of kind of finding an outlier, and then when people think of private equity, kind of further along an investment journey, they think of they're not being kind of outliers, they just think of solid returns. But a lot of that I see as a kind of a bit of a mythos. If you look at private equity portfolios, there often are sort of big returners of capital, and we try to take a pretty open-minded approach in terms of the kind of profile of a business, and whether it hits venture scale or not, or whether it's going to be a solid business that might kind of look a bit more like a PE business, but do really well over time, and crucially provide people on the ground with something incredible, is kind of more interest to us. I don't know if that answers your question. I feel I went off on a reverie.
No, not at all.
What are your kind of dreams for the UK? Like, what would you want to see? Where do you think we're kind of dropping the ball? Where do you think that, like, we should be more ambitious? And I'm talking like a bit outside of Basis Capital. I kind of want to get to know you a bit more of your worldview and stuff.
Yeah, I suppose I have a slightly kind of odd take on that. It kind of summed up where I was talking to an investor friend the other day. And whittering on about politics, and he said it's not the politics that are the problem, it's the people, and that kind of sat uncomfortably for me, because one thing that I'll often put forward is something that I started terming abundant feudalism, and now nobody else says it, but I continue to say it, which is a sort of notion that more and more people work for the state or the dark state. They will pay tax, but often they'll live in housing that's provided by the state, or they'll rely on handouts from the state. And they are, because the state is such a market maker of wages now. They're kind of destined to live in a world where they can only use services provided by the state, whether that's sending their kids to school, whether it's healthcare. And so I didn't really like the idea that, that sort of people with the problem, that we've all got this kind of attitude issue, and that's what sort of brought us here. But I think one of the things that I've been trying to sort of dig into in my own mind is, well, what is going on? Because we don't have the kind of same attitude that we associate with kind of the war, or even potentially pre-COVID. What was it that meant that people were so ready to accept a tsunami of state intervention and interference in their lives over the COVID period, for example? What has led to that? And I think it perhaps is as simple as just you get to a point where there is so much state that it fundamentally changes how a group of people behave. And the kind of overlay to that for me is that the thing that makes us human is that we not just cooperate, because lots of animals do that, but we have certain qualities to our cooperation. It's also why we can trade with each other and crucially don't need government to do a lot of this stuff for us. We have the capacity for indirect reciprocity, so we don't need for something to be a direct exchange. We can do something knowing that there could be a delayed reaction that we might not even be a part of, but that's what human cooperation looks like. For most of the time, we've gone about quite merrily using reputation dynamics as a way to build trust and also to know how to act amongst each other. The problem.
What do you mean by reputation dynamics?
So if you do a bad thing to James, then I think Becca is a real turd. And then
it's just like gossiping.
It's behavioural, so
Okay.
it's the way we interact as humans. If we base our decisioning around other humans on their reputation, and this is sort of like that sort of band underneath the Shakespearean understanding of it. You develop a view of someone, and you are constantly augmenting that based on their behaviour, not just towards you but towards others as well. The issue now is that there is so much state in people's lives that oftentimes they get a lot of the things that they need without having to develop a reputation. Because if you just get something facelessly, if you just can go and get an alternative salary, or you can, a food bank would be a poor example, but you can go and fill in a form and get a car, and there is no neck on the line there. There is no sense that you need to continue to do something that other people are aware of in order to continue to get that, or that there might be swings and roundabouts and you've been helped out at this point in time, but later down the line you might help someone else. So I think there is so much state in people's lives now that it has immunised the ability for us to create these reputation and trust dynamics that are fundamental to being human, and that means that we've capped aspiration. There is no need to get better. If everything that you need can be provided by a faceless, form-filling, bureaucratic entity, and you don't know where that money comes from, and you don't know if someone's worked to stick it into the pot so that it can be poorly distributed and funneled back out to you, there is no need for you to aspire to do better, and to want better for yourself. And that is where we have placed a lot of people in this country now. Like, that is what we have resigned our fellow man and our fellow citizen to, that kind of life. That's where we've gone wrong, and that's what we need to fix.
I guess there's an element of kind of like personal responsibility within that as well, right?
Yeah.
That we've taken away. It's not just the kind of what the relationship dynamics is, it's actually earning something and building something yourself, which I think is like a great way to actually have self-fulfillment.
And I think unfortunately, we've elided helping and supporting people with the notion that if you suggest that someone should also have agency, it somehow compromises that you can't be truly philanthropic and also suggest that someone should have aspirations and dreams and be able to strive for them. And that feels like a dark place. It's also why I think that having the movement side of LFG is really important, because people can opt into it and they can say, I am going to grab hold of the agency that I do have, and I'm going to be part of something. And yeah, I don't think we have anywhere near enough of that. And you can just see it playing out in everything. We build affordable, not aspirational housing.
Yeah.
People don't want to live in a Barrett box their entire lives. Like, no, they might want to live in one right now because, practically it's the thing they can move into. They don't want to die in one. And that's, but it's, you can see it across everything, and it's sort of laced with this institutionalized nastiness that unfortunately is a kind of a state of play where the state's got as well. So that notion that it's people trying to sort of build an efficiency from the centre, you end up with things like parking machines where you pop in your number plate. Well, that means you can't give your ticket if you've got 20 minutes left. You can't say to someone, "Hi, do you want a ticket? Here you go."
Yeah.
So suddenly there's no interaction. There's no moment of kindness, because it's been written out by efficiency and technology, but kind of in a way that doesn't actually improve anything. It actually makes it worse, which is a different point. But to me, it forms this kind of same underbelly that is just, at this point, I think is really getting people down.
Do you think it's really strong in the British psyche that we don't like aspiration?
Yes, I don't know that it's just us,
yeah.
But I think we can say that we've switched ourselves off to it. I certainly think in my lifetime, the kind of this sense of pushing oneself has changed, like what that means and what that looks like for like a lifetime has changed. And some of it's just sort of really little things, like the kinds of businesses you might go and work for, or what you might see as the kind of like box ticks for life, and some of them obviously remain kind of fundamental, but I think just the sort of there's a sense of defeatism, I think, but I don't think people recognise it as that necessarily. And of course, once you're up to your eyeballs in debt, and you've got your mortgage, and you've got your rubbish job at McKinsey or wherever it is, and you've got your 2 kids and whatnot, then there's not really much optionality at that point. But you are in a kind of late stage Keynesianism. It's not late stage capitalism. It's we're dealing with corporatism here. It's
a really interesting point that you raise around like autonomy and agency, and also a big factor I have of LFG, and when I've spoken to people from the chapters, and what kind of really excites me about those is LFG provides a vehicle which they can feel empowered by. Mm-hmm. So they can set up a local chapter and they can find a local issue and people who care about it and feel like they're doing something, and you're not just continuously in this spiral where, as we talk about things getting worse, or not feeling like you've got agency to make a difference. And I think you hit it really well at this point of, there's so much deference to the state. When something's wrong in society or something's going wrong in the economy or whatever it is, the first point of call is like, what's government going to do? What's the change here that government's got to do? What's the legislation it's got to pass? What is tax it's got to raise? Or what's the spend it's got to make? Rather than a factor of, okay, well, what is actually the change we can make as a society, or that we need to leverage? But it just feels like there's not that feeling in society that there's autonomy or the empowerment to do that. And I think that just keeps rising, right? And this comes back to the point we were making about central government having to feel like it had to run everything from the centre. I think partly because it's not empowering people, but also people below aren't feeling empowered. So you get this issue of the centre says, okay, go off and do this, and then nothing happens because no one feels empowered or has lost their agency to do this stuff, or it's been significantly diminished. So then the centre feel, well, to get it done, we have to now make it all centralised, and then you just get this continuous problem.
Yes, and I think crucially there, the thing becomes that you need less state, not more state. And I think the one thing where you kind of have to decide where you come down is, are you an individualist or are you a super individualist? Do you think that the answer lies at the individual level, or do you think it lies at the level of an institution? Plenty of people I know wouldn't answer the latter. I would answer the former, obviously. And that's fine, but they're still going to need to prove it out because it has not been proved out. And we can all see that. We can all see the scleroticism, things getting worse in people's lives out on the streets. So clearly, more state, as it is currently being manifest, is not the solution. And I think plenty of reasonable people would say, well, it just needs to be more efficient. The problem, as well, the LFG team knows, is that you can end up in a situation where you just kind of be getting more state to try and get less state. The answer has to be, well, how do we actually go, right? How do we diminish this? How do we get that statute down to a fraction of the size of what it was, what it is, and back to where it was. And again, like even in my lifetime, if you take a sort of 3-decade period, you've had this tremendous expansion of the rules and regs that kind of govern how we operate. And the problem is, again, that's back to that kind of like tiny point, that can you make one small change, and you can kind of invert that and say if somebody is just I don't know, a vet dealing with the rules, average level of rules and regs, or a teacher, so much of their lives now are taken up by navigating rules that actually that autonomy and agency gets quashed, and I think that's a sort of important way to look at it. Just that an average person's sort of life, how many rules and regs do we have to come into contact with in order to kind of just operate normally, and is that a normal way of being and doing? I think it's why the LFG work is so important, because it's actually how do you get this smaller and get this more efficient and more specific, rather than go, how do we continue to layer on, because layering on clearly doesn't get us to where we want to get to, does it?
The important thing to resolve around, like, when you go for the argument of reducing state, people naturally get worried that they're going to now lose protections which they had before, because it's become this level of reliance, as you say, or involvement. They're getting payments, they're getting services provided, etc. And albeit they've been like kind of constantly cut over the last 15 or so years, but they still are there in some form, and everyone's obviously worried it goes further and they get even worse than they already are, if that can happen. Navigating that switch, right, is really tricky in how you feel like, okay, you're going to be protected. Look at the PIP stuff. That's a great example of, okay, there's a system which is currently being heavily used, and we need to reduce the number of claimants for it, because at the moment there's such a huge number of claimants, it's not sustainable. There's potentially cases in there which obviously are not what we should be funding, but also there's a bunch of people who we should be protecting with PIP, and like getting that right and getting those people not to lose their entitlement, or them get worried they're going to lose it. This is a really critical thing to overcome. How do you see, like, come back onto BASIS very briefly, do you see BASIS as like an opportunity to kind of move that, both in terms of giving people agency, who can create services and show that, actually the state doesn't need to provide everything, other services can be created which does that, but also kind of enabling that wave, right? Because if there's already companies which are set up, then if the state moves back from an area, they're like, oh, wait a second, there's already this thing operating in this area which we can now move to, and oh, look, it runs far smoother, or there's competition in this area.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of hope?
Yeah, exactly. Can we provide alternatives? Because then that makes the shift less scary. But I do think a shift needs to happen because the centre ain't holding. So I think, that's just echoing what you're saying, really. But yeah, that's exactly how we see it. What if we start building in the gaps, and also where the state is providing something, but it's getting worse, and then there's just more on the market for everybody to be able to access, and then if there is a pullback of a service, which there will have to be, then it becomes less of a fraught and scary or problematic, kind of scenario. I think a note as well, which is important on the mode that we've now got ourselves into is, and you touched on it there, James, is we don't live in a negative rights paradigm anymore. We live in a positive rights paradigm. So the difference being, I have no right to kill you versus you have a right to life, I have a right to life. That those latter statements are positive rights. The challenge with positive rights is that you can not just define anything into existence, but you can't put an amount of value on one person's version of that. So, and this is why we've seen, for example, spend on transport for send children for local councils. These extraordinary levels of indebtedness. Sometimes to the tune of $500 million and more actually per local authority. Because how do you turn around and say, well, actually, you've got 4 children who you could fall under this and qualify for this, but these 2 don't deserve it. They just don't qualify, because you define something into existence and then you cannot put a value judgment from that point. That's not sustainable, and it's not nice, and it's not easy to say that or to hear it. But it's just the fact of the matter, and actually the problem is that people who really, really need the help and the support are going to start losing out, because everything will start fraying, and that to me is why it's so important that we build a more resilient market. And it's not a resilient system, it's a resilient market. We need to have multiple providers, we need to have multiple options for people, because in the event where the state provided thing don't work anymore, and we haven't touched on government indebtedness, but it's very real, the level of debt that our government relies on, as they do across the Western world. Another key characteristic, not to the exclusion of other governments, mind you, is now so high that this stuff just can't continue on. It's just not an option for it to. So we have to keep building.
What's your kind of worst vision for Britain? Like, not to get really doomerish about this, but what would a kind of worst case scenario? Our institutions remain the same, like our systems remain the same. What does it kind of look like? What are you trying to stop, if that makes sense?
If we get to a point where the interest on government debt ends up higher than the potential tax base, I don't really know what that looks like. Yeah. But we're not there, and that's, I deliberately said interest rather than the debt itself. But it's not an impossible situation to imagine.
It's already more on the defence budget rise, and I think more on the education budget. It's 100 billion, so it's
And you can't print your way out of that. I mean, you can't print your way out of anything, because if you print money, you dilute the unit and you make people poorer. If you get to that point, people are really poor, and they actually you're poor, and that's like not just I can't get hold of a phone or TV or internet. It's I can't get hold of food. I think it always feels sort of daft to say it because it's actually but not because it's dramatic, but because it's very unlikely that a given human in the course of humanity will live to see the fall of a civilization. But that doesn't mean that it's completely out of the question. Yeah. And humans have lived and lived through the fall of a civilization, and that's a worst case scenario for any human who's fortunate enough to end up on planet Earth. But I think what's more likely is we just continue on as we are, and you get different narratives painting different pictures and pushing those pictures across the media, and people get very het up and continue to sort of fight out and sweat the small stuff. When in fact, if we could all just put a little bit of time into doing the thing that we will do best, and everyone has something that they do well, and feel that there is room for everyone to do that, then we'll probably start trending in the right direction magically by ourselves. I think we just all need to believe that we can do that, and that's your kind of first step.
You first got involved with LFG and our second event, right, in March,
all the way
big
back in
policy
March.
Event.
Yeah. You
came on stage and gave a rousing speech to our crowd of 200, and now the next event we're going to do with you is the hackathon in June, the LFG Basis Capital Hackathon.
Yeah. I'm actually speaking at your June 10th event, so that's exciting for everyone.
I'm out of date.
But 28th and 29th of June, we are doing a hackathon, LFG and Basis together in London. There's going to be over 100 competitors. We're coming together to outcompete the state. It's going to be very exciting. It's going to look and feel and likely smell like any other hackathon, but our streams and our focus are to build better than the state is currently managing to do. We are bringing together founders, engineers, people in politics, investors, and also a bunch of journalists to run across the 2 days. We'll have building, and then on the Sunday we'll have a kind of mini demo day to see what people have managed to pull together. We've already got a really exciting, rousing and kind of compelling Discord channel going, so we can already see people starting to riff on ideas and come up with things that they're going to be looking at. But we'll be tackling everything from health span to housing, crime to schools, if you are interested in participating, we'd absolutely love to have you there. You can sign up via the LFG website, look across socials as well, same on the Basis website, or if you are interested in attending as an audience member when we do those demos, we'd also love to have you there. Then it should be a really exciting event, can't wait to get stuck in. I will be going to bed on the Saturday, but there is the option not to go to bed. But
48 hours, right? And if you're hardcore, you don't sleep. You just Red Bull it up, and not that that's advised for health reasons.
No, but it is an age thing, James. But there's an age thing and there's a cut-off, and I am unfortunately over the cut-off.
Yeah, I may just be awake anyway because my son doesn't like sleeping at the moment. So I might not be doing the coding, but I'll be with him in spirit.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Looking forward to it. It's going to be a great night. Please do look on the LFG website or the Basis website.
We'll also be announcing some really exciting speakers and judges as well. So keep an eye out for that as well.
I think there's a final question, don't you want to ask, Becca, or you want to ask everyone?
Yeah, what's like a crazy idea for growth that you have?
Goodness
Quite broad. Be a policy, could be a
blimp.
What was it, the theme park on the... that was your
theme
thing.
park on the...
On the east of London, that was your thing,
that was actually a legitimate thing which got prevented. That was
I think
a sad story.
My sort of serious, earnest answer is always going to be just that, which is that the most heretical thing for growth is less government. Like, it's government getting out of the way.
It's pretty crazy these days.
It is because actually
crazy.
Whoa.
Too far.
I think it's very easy to accidentally be a socialist when you're thinking about growth, because you go, what can government do to achieve X?
Yeah.
Growth is a thing that happens when you don't centrally plan stuff. Like we know what happens if you do too much central planning. Millions of people die. That's what happens. Growth is the thing that happens when government and central planners get out of the way of individuals who go and they use their skills and their ingenuity to do things that we can't even predict. That is my dull but heretical and zaniest view on the matter, because it really matters to me that, you know, that we keep saying that and we keep reminding ourselves of that.
Brilliant.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent.